Hi, everybody. So we have talked about Adam, who was God's first created man, who lived in the Garden of Eden, which is a metaphor for the temple. He was kicked out because he chose to not be integrated into God's plan. He didn't want to be the image bearer of God. He disobeyed God, kicked out of the garden, which is our temple metaphor. Then we talked about Noah. Noah was the only one that wanted to be with God. And then in the end, after, we again had that temple metaphor with the boat, with the ark. And then after they land on land, we're told that Noah gets drunk and naked and falls out of this relationship with God. So the next covenant that we have is with Abram, who eventually gets a name changed to Abraham. So we are with Abram now. And if you like drama and sinful behavior, read this story. It's pretty entertaining. So God goes to Abram because he sees Abram as a good, solid guy, and he makes a covenant with Abram. He tells Abram, you are going to have descendants that outnumber the stars. Basically, all good things are going to be for Abram. Now, so what Abram does is, what we need to understand is that Jewish culture, sacrifice is a core part of Jewish worship. When a covenant is an extension of kinship or family bond to somebody that is not in your family. So God is saying, you are my family now, Abram. We are family. He's extending this kinship bond. So that'd be the same thing as if I was like, okay, going to you and saying, we aren't blood family, but you are now in my family. We would make a covenant together. In the making of this covenant, what Abram does is he takes a dove. I can't remember the animals off the top of my head, but anyway, I think he takes a dove, a goat, something else. He cuts them in half, lights them on fire, and then he walks through them. And the reason Abram does this is he is saying, God, if I do not hold up my end of the covenant, do to me what I did to these animals. And they establish this covenant together, this family bond. And God tells Abram, you are going to have descendants. At this point, though, Abram's old, his wife Sarai is old, and while yes, they have all of this great wealth, they have land and animals and these great promises for God, but they're like, we're old. God said we're supposed to have descendants, and Sarah just said, she was like, I haven't been able to have any children from you. And they come up with a plan. They're like, all right, God said we're supposed to have descendants, so Abram, sleep with my slave girl. So Sarai takes her slave girl Hagar and gives it to her husband for him to impregnate. And it works. Hagar has Ishmael. Now this offends God because Abram and Sarai didn't trust God to be able to hold up his end of the bargain, which cracks me up because I'm just thinking, if God's talking to me and he's like, I'm going to give you these things, I wouldn't think, he can't do that. I'm going to take care of it myself. But that's basically what happened. Sarai and Abram take matters into their own hands because they don't believe that God's going to fulfill what he promised. So Abram messes up and breaks the covenant by getting Hagar pregnant. God still provides for Hagar and Ishmael, even though Hagar and Ishmael, they endure so much abuse under Sarai because she's jealous. She's jealous that her maid servant was able to have a baby and it made her look bad. It's a really emotional story if you read it too. We don't have time to get into that in this 10-minute video, but it's a very emotional thing that Sarai is undergoing because here God is saying that her husband is going to have descendants that outnumber the stars, but she can't give him a baby. And so she takes out all of that aggression on this poor slave girl who was able to give Abram a baby. What happens next, because Ishmael was still provided for, but that wasn't the way that God intended this to happen. So he tells Abram at this point, we're establishing a new covenant. You will still have descendants, but instead of sacrificing the animals, you must cut off a part of yourself. And this is awesome, but circumcision comes into play. So Abram gets a name changed. He is no longer Abram, he is now Abraham. Sarai is no longer Sarai, she is Sarah. And Abraham, to secure this covenant, has to cut off a piece of himself, circumcision. So he has to cut off the tip of his man parts. And everybody in this line must circumcise themselves. They must cut that piece of flesh off as a reminder that we made this covenant with God It was broken once by Abram, who became Abraham, and now we must continue to cut off a piece of our flesh as the sign of this relationship with God, as this covenant. So Abram circumcises himself. He gets a name change. Now they are Sarah and Abraham. The significance of the name changes in the Bible, this is something that you guys will also do for confirmation that we talk about in the retreat. They change their name to show a turning point, that they are now a different person. And Sarah becomes pregnant with Isaac and gives birth to Isaac. Now Isaac is this very special baby because at this point they are so old and now they have a child. They finally have a child that's going to inherit everything, that's going to fulfill that promise that God made, that descendants will outnumber the stars. And God does something very strange, and he says, Abraham, do you have true faith in me? Take Isaac and sacrifice him to me. Now, alarm bells should be ringing in your head right now because, here we have God who says, don't kill, and he's asking for the death of a child. This is important, and it doesn't mean what you think it means. It doesn't mean that God is just like, yeah, I want to kill a kid. This is the nature of the Jewish relationship of sacrifice, but this is also pointing us to Christ, and here's how. So at this point, Isaac is a teenager. A lot of people in artwork display Abraham and Isaac as Abraham is this old man carrying a baby up to be sacrificed up to the top of this mountain. But actually at this point in time, Isaac is a teenager and most likely a willing participant. So listen to the parallels when Abraham goes to sacrifice his son, Isaac. Isaac is called the first and only begotten son. That is what Christ is called. The first and only begotten son of God. That's Jesus. That's how they're referring to Isaac in this story. So Isaac and Abraham go to the mountain, and Abraham is placing all of his trust in God. God's already told him, you are going to have descendants. He knows who God is. So at this point, he's like, I'm just going to have faith, and I'm going to do what God tells me to do. I'm trusting God on this. And this is showing, scripturally, this is showing us a very faithful person that is laying everything out in front of God. So they travel to the mountain that God told Abraham to sacrifice Isaac on. They tell the servants, wait for us here, we'll be back. And the two of them go up the mountain. Isaac is displayed as carrying wood to his death up a mountain. This exactly parallels what happens to Jesus. The only begotten son of Abraham, Isaac, is carrying wood on his back to his death. Jesus, the only begotten son of God, carries wood on his back up the mountain to his death. The difference is when Abraham and Isaac make it to the top and Isaac asks, what is the sacrifice? And Abraham, you are the sacrifice, son. Isaac is ready to be killed. And an angel of the Lord says, no, don't kill him. He is not the one that is meant to be sacrificed. God saves Isaac from his death, but he shows us that somebody from Abraham's line is going to be the perfect sacrifice. So who's that person from the line of Abraham, a descendant of Abraham? It's going to be Jesus. This is an important thing that you have to know this portion, because two people in the Old Testament are said to be ancestors of Christ. David, who we're going to talk about a couple videos from now, and Abraham. The descendant, the Messiah, had to be related to Abraham, and Jesus is related to Abraham, and we will get there. But we are given these parallels of this firstborn son going up a mountaintop by his own, I'm losing my words. He makes the choice, I'm going up this mountain to be sacrificed for God. The sacrifice culture of the Jewish people, we're really going to get into this in the next story, but what they believed is that sin had to cause death. You could not simply sin and be forgiven without killing something, without the awareness that what I did was so wrong that something has to die. It was very prevalent in this time for people to sacrifice animals. In Jesus's time, what people would do was bring animals to the temple to be killed. They had sacrifices in the morning and they had sacrifices at 3 p.m. in the afternoon called the Tomine sacrifices, and we will get into that. But I want you guys to really just embrace in this story the parallels of Abraham's son Isaac to Jesus. We are getting the foreshadowing now, and this is why it is so important to understand this story. So I am going to attach some questions into the email for each of you, and I hope you enjoyed this little tidbit in the video. Again, there's so much that happens in the story that's really amazing, but that's the peak of it. So remember, Jesus is a descendant of Abraham. Jesus was paralleled to Isaac. Isaac foreshadows Jesus, except we know that Jesus dies. So hang on to that. I hope you enjoyed this quick little video, and I look forward to talking about, who am I talking about? Moses next week and all the plagues. That's a fun one. Bye.